Okay, in this vid, we are going to go over statements and objects in JavaScript. Statements, we're going to go over all the loops, the different control structures, if else, switch, while, do while, for. Then we're going to go over some littler statements, in, label, break, continue, return, with. Then we're going to go over objects. We'll talk about some ways to use properties, some different ways to access properties. We'll talk about how to delete properties. Then we'll talk about arrays, which are objects, and different things about arrays. You can use multidimensional arrays. You can search through arrays. You can use a bunch of methods on arrays: join, reverse, sort, concat, slice, splice, push, pop, unshift, shift, and toString. So good stuff. Let's go. Okay, so statements. We have different loops, different control structures. If is the sort of most basic. If the condition in here is true, then the statement after if runs. The statement after if can have curly brackets, but it doesn't have to if it's just one line. If it's one line, it can go here or here, because spaces and line breaks kind of don't matter in JavaScript. So if x is equal to 1, which it is, then it'll alert howdy. Okay. Next we have if else. So if else is just like if, but if this condition is not true, then the statement. If this condition is not true, then the statement in the else clause will run instead of the statement in the if clause. Now, if you have quite a few different conditions you want to test for, you could use a bunch of like ifs after each other, or if else's, and then with a bunch of else's, or a bunch of nested ifs or something crazy. But the more eloquent way is to use switch statements. So switch is like this. You have your condition here. Yeah, so we're saying what's the value of x, and then here you have all your different cases. So if x is equal to 0, then run this. If x is equal to 1, run this. So you could have anything here. You could have like string, like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or anything like that. And then here you can have multiple lines inside your cases, and then your cases end with break. So that's kind of an odd structure. Break just means break out of the thing after it finishes the one case. Otherwise, it'll just run through all of these. And then you have this optional case down here called default, and that's so if all these aren't satisfied, if all these are not equal to this, then it'll run the default code. So in this case, x is equal to 1, so we should get hello. Okay, while. We've kind of already talked about these, so I'm just going to fly through them. While this condition is satisfied, then run this. You usually want to change this, otherwise it would be an infinite loop. Do while. Do while is just like while, except it runs the do clause first, and then it checks the condition. So it'll always run once, no matter if the condition is never satisfied even once. For. So this is maybe the most common loop. It's also got this weird little syntax here. So for this stuff, run this. So you initialize your variable here. You could say var I equals 0. You don't always see the var thing here, since you don't need to use the var to declare a variable. It just ends up as a global variable. So sometimes it'll just be like I equals 0. Then you end these in semicolons because these are different statements here. The last one doesn't have to end in a semicolon because JavaScript, you don't need semicolons on every statement if you don't want, but you should. So while this, so as long as I is less than 10, and then at the end of each, at the end of all your code, then do this, increment it by 1. Pardon it. I guess the increment. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay. In. So this is saying this is a way to loop through your properties. You can grab X, Y, and Z in this case. So you're saying you have this object with these properties. For variable prop, and prop is like arbitrary. It doesn't really matter what you call it. That's just a variable. Variable prop in object, whatever this is, then alert prop. So it just kind of loops through all your different things. It'll grab X, Y, and Z, all your different properties. Label. So label is this weird thing. You can just put any word here you want, and it becomes a label when you end it with a colon, and then you have some stuff afterwards. So that means that this code has this like handle, this hook, and then you can use a break and a return on it if you want. So this here will just run this, but it does have this this label, but the label's not really doing anything yet. Okay. So here you can break using the label. Now this is kind of oversimplified. You usually would do something more interesting than this, but what this will do is it'll run this once, and then it'll break out of the for after it runs once, using that label. And here's a continue. You can use a continue with a label. Here I'm just using a continue. So continue just means like start back at the top of this loop. So it won't finish whatever's after the continue. So in this case, it'll start running through this loop, and then as soon as I is 3, instead of running the alert, it'll hop back up to the top and then start the next one. So it'll just skip that time. So skip from 2 to 4. Here's return. So functions have an optional return. Return usually goes at the end, but it doesn't have to. And so return means what the whole function evaluates to. So you can run as much code as you want. It could be thousands of lines of code inside your function, but then eventually generally you want a function to boil down to one value. So it does a bunch of calculations or something like that, and then it ends up popping this value out. So you can just like alert the whole function, and whatever gets returned is what's going to get alerted. Okay. With. So with is kind of weird. It puts. So let's say you have a big object with a bunch of properties that you're trying to access, and you don't feel like typing this out every time. You can use with animal quadruped in this case, with the part of the object and properties that you don't want to keep typing out, and then you can just type the part after this here. So we could type animal.quadruped.dog.name equals Fido, but instead we do with animal.quadruped, and then all we have to type is dog.name equals Fido. In. So we've already gone in. We've already gone over in. So we're getting into objects now. There are two ways to test if a property exists. One is to say, is X in object O? If it is, in this case, alert hello. So that's the first way to test if a property exists. The second way is to say O.X object.property. If it's not equal to undefined, so if that property is not undefined, then alert hello. So that means the property is there. And you can delete a property in an object. So here we are deleting the X property, and then we're going to try to alert the X property. And because it's undefined, because it was deleted, it's undefined. Okay. Let's see what we just did. So we were talking about properties. There are two ways to access properties. You can access it by doing object name dot property, and the property wouldn't have quotes here. It kind of looks like a variable in that case. and the other way is to do it object name, and then like array notation with quotes in it, and then the property name. So it's kind of different. You can do it without quotes, and it looks like a variable, or you can do it with quotes, and it looks like a array element. But really, we're just talking about objects and properties. So both of these will work. Now, why would you do the second one? Well, it's very convenient when you are sort of, I don't know what the word is, dynamically trying to access the different properties. So this is kind of a silly example, but here we're going to loop through our object, and we're going to, we're looping through the object properties, and each time we grab a property, we're going to assign it a new color. We're going to assign it a string of new color 1, new color 2, and that number depends on what number element we're on. And then we're going to alert the second one. So you can see here that kind of ends up being very convenient, because you can't really access the other property name quite so easily. The one without the array notation, the one without the quotes. Okay, so here's a weird JavaScript type thing. So when you say, so when you create an object, this is kind of shorthand for saying like new object equals, or whatever equals new object, I guess. And this is a way to get back to that constructor, that new object with a capital O constructor. So here we're saying like there's a property of every object called .constructor, and it's just always in there. There are user-defined properties, and then there are a bunch of like default system properties that just come, and .constructor is one of them. And here we're just saying like if .constructor is equal to object capital O, which is the constructor object, then alert true. Okay, so that's kind of weird. We'll get a lot more into that stuff. JavaScript's got all kinds of crazy stuff like this. Okay, there is something called, so we're going to move on from regular objects now to arrays. Arrays are objects, but they're kind of special objects. So we've already gone over arrays. We don't need to get all wild and crazy. But here is something called a sparse array. So you have like element 1, 2, and 3, or element 0, 1, and 2 it would be, the element names. And then here we're saying like an element 100 put in this guy. So what happened to all those other guys in between, position 2 in a 0-based array, and then position 100? Well, they're just empty. They're not defined or anything. So you can do a sparse array, and it doesn't allocate memory for all the empty places in between. So that's kind of handy. If we alert this, it's going to show all the empty positions. And these are just like comma, 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 because these are all empty. But I think that's because when you alert an object, it tries to convert it to a string. So I guess when it converts it to a string, it shows all these empty guys. But I believe it doesn't allocate memory unnecessarily for a sparse array. Okay, so now we're just going to fly through a lot of this array stuff. Really, you just want to practice with it a little bit. So you can delete an element in an array. If I delete it and then try to alert the deleted one, it'll say undefined. You have multi-dimensional arrays. Those are arrays within, here's not multi-dimensional arrays. Here is just cycling through your array, grabbing all the different elements, using a for loop, and using the index as the element. And then multi-dimensional arrays are arrays within arrays. So this is element 1, element 2, and element 3. And the elements of an array can be anything: numbers, strings, other. It can be objects. It can be other arrays. So when you have an array inside an array, it becomes a multi-dimensional array. And to access an element, you do like square brackets 1, so that means if you're grabbing like element 1, 2, or 3, and then this is what element of this element you want. So we've already grabbed element 0, that's this guy, and then which element do we want? 0, 1, 2, we're going to grab this guy. Remember, array indices are 0 based. They don't start at 1, they start at 0. Okay, so here we can join. If you use join on an array, it just turns it all into a big string. By default, they're separated by commas, so this is the string. You can use reverse, so this will just reverse our array. 3, 2, 1. You can do sort. Sort by default sorts alphabetically. You can pass in a parameter to tell it to sort other ways besides alphabetically. Okay, concat adds to the end of an array. So we have 1, 2, 3, 99. Slice slices out a section of the array that you declare. So this is going to be 0 based, and then the first is exclusive and the second is inclusive. So that is to say, this is going to grab me element 3 and 4 of this guy. Splice is kind of similar to slice. If you just pass in one number, it'll slice from that number on. Splice actually does a lot more. You can add or delete using splice depending on what parameters you pass in. So push pushes something onto the end of the array. So here we added 7. Pop will pop the last item off the array. Unshift will remove the it'll add, a number to the beginning of the array. Shift removes the first item of the array. And then we've already talked about toString a little bit, but toString will try to convert your object or your array to a string. Okay, that's it.